You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What are the strengths of Stanford and who are some of their key players? Let's go over perhaps their brightest star, perhaps the guy that is most likely on Stanford to be an NFL player, and that is wide receiver Elic Ayomanor. He is 6'2", 210 pounds. He's a wide receiver and a redshirt sophomore. And in 2023, Ayomanor had 62 catches for over 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. He led Stanford in every single receiving category, and it wasn't even close. For more context on this kid, he had 26 more catches than the next leading receiver on Stanford last year. He had over 600 more yards than the next leading Stanford receiver, and he had 4 more receiving touchdowns than the next leading Stanford wide receiver. So Ayomanor is by far and away the best weapon on Stanford. He is the guy on their team that is most likely going to be playing on Sundays. Ayomanor, keep your eye on him. He is the main outside weapon on Stanford's offense. Now in 2024, Ayomanor was the only Stanford player that was selected to the preseason All-ACC team. The only one. He was the only one on Stanford to make that. And by the way, I have said this with the Syracuse players who were selected. It was Gaethan and Marlo Wax, that when they released that preseason all-conference team, it was only one team that they released. Just one. So Ayomanor making that shows that he is one of the premier players, not just on Stanford, but in the entire conference. One of the best receivers in the entire conference. And so far this season, he is leading the team with 147 receiving yards, but he has yet to catch a touchdown. And hopefully Syracuse can keep it that way on Friday night. He's got good hands. He can catch the ball in traffic. And oh, by the way, he can take the top off the defense. So you've got to keep an eye on him if you're the Syracuse defense. That's the guy you really have to key on. He is a future NFL wide receiver. Keep your eye on Elic Ayomanor for Stanford, okay? Secondly, their run defense is surprisingly pretty good. It's good. And I don't really care about what Stanford did against Cal Poly, because what they did against Cal Poly is absolutely demolished their run games. Cal Poly had like 25 total rushing yards on barely over 1 yard per carry. You know it's bad if I'm saying yard per carry and not yards per carry, because if I'm saying yard per carry, that means you only had 1. That's it. But that was against Cal Poly. I don't really care about that. What I do care about is how Stanford did against TCU. And Stanford held TCU to just over 100 yards in the game in total. It was 104 to be exact, but only on 3.1 yards per carry. That's it. So Stanford's run defense was actually really good in that game. And I did check and see and say, okay, well, was it because they sacked the quarterback a lot? Because in college football, it's so wacky with the stats and everything that they're like, hey, if you sack the quarterback, that counts against the team's rushing yards, even though it really shouldn't. In the NFL, they don't count sacks toward a team's rushing yards. But in college football, they do. Stanford only had 1 sack in the game. And unless that sack went for like a 30-yard loss, then that 3.1 yards per carry is a pretty accurate number of how Stanford did against TCU's running game. They were pretty solid overall. And really, it's not so much their defensive line, it is their linebacker unit. That is the backbone of Stanford's defense. It is headlined by Tristan Sinclair and Gaethan Bernadel. Those 2 players are the main catalysts on Stanford defense, patrolling the middle of the field. So their linebacker unit is really the strength of their defense. They are among the leaders already on Stanford in tackles and in tackles for loss. So those are some of the strengths and the key players on Stanford. Once again, on offense, it's that big wide receiver, 6'2", 210 pounds, Elic Ayomanor, preseason All-ACC, had 1,000 yards receiving last year on a pretty crummy Stanford team. Think about that. Over 1,000 yards on that team last year. I think they went like 3-9 or whatever. Elic Ayomanor on offense and the linebackers on Stanford's defense combined with their run defense overall. So, look, we're going to get to their weaknesses in just a second. Can Syracuse run the ball against Stanford? They probably will be able to do it, but maybe not at the efficiency that you would like. This is a game, because coming up, I'm going to tell you that this is a game where, once again, expect Kyle McCord to absolutely pick apart this defense. Absolutely pick apart